First question, how do you see these elections? This is an extraordinary election. We've never had two candidates who are so different in personality, in experience, and in the policy positions that they hold. This is a real choice that the American people have this year. The American people are extremely divided. There are lots of people who think Trump is the only answer to the problems facing the United States, and there are others that see him as a real threat, not only to democracy, not only to this country, but to democracy itself. Question 2. What impact will this election have on international relations? Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have two very different visions of the role of the United States in the world. Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, believes in coalition building and alliances. Donald Trump, on the other hand, thinks that often America can go alone. He has very little good to say about our international partners. He's questioned the role of NATO even, which has been a defense alliance that has existed since the beginning of the Cold War. They have very different views of international relations. Clinton, for example, would go after ISIS, the so-called Islamic State, by building coalitions of Arab and European and other allies to take on terrorism and the so-called Islamic State. What would Trump do is anybody's guess. He could do everything. He talks about bombing them out of existence. He talks about using torture, not only on and going after not only the terrorists but their families. This would be, of course, a recipe for disaster. The third question is about the bizarre nature of the campaigns. The campaign this year is quite bizarre. We have a candidate who is a billionaire claiming to represent the views of the working class America. We have a reality star from television claiming to have the expertise and ability to be President of the United States. We have a candidate, the first woman candidate for President of the United States, who is not well-liked, not trusted. In fact, neither candidate is really liked or trusted by most Americans. The one thing that Hillary Clinton has in her favor is that people consider her qualified to be president, whereas most people don't consider Donald Trump to be qualified. They look at Mrs. Clinton's experience as Secretary of State, as a senator, and as First Lady, and believe that she has the experience to be president. Now, some people think that Donald Trump's experience as a businessman qualifies him to be president because they're very concerned about the state of the economy in the United States. You know, when I look at Donald Trump, one of the Latin American presidents that he reminds me of is, of course, Perón. You know, the kind of man who clashed with the establishment who took on everybody and created a cult of personality around himself. That I think I think there's a lot of parallels between Donald Trump and General Perón. The third question deals with one of the issues that most concern Latin America, has to do with populism. Does the United States also suffer from populism, the typical populist format? I'll repeat some of the things I said in the previous question. Donald Trump appeals to a section of America which is very nostalgic about the 1950s. It's basically white working class America who were able to join the middle class in the 1950s and 60s because there were lots of factory jobs. There were good paying jobs that someone with a high school education or less could get and make a good living doing. Those jobs are disappearing. Because of globalization and also because of the use of robots and mechanization of factory jobs in the United States. It's simply that those jobs are disappearing either abroad, or workers are being replaced by robots. This popular appeal that Donald Trump has reminds me of the appeal that Perón had in Argentina. He took on the political establishment, he established a cult of personality, and he appealed both to the people who were running the country, the economic elites, but also to the working classes. I think this is the kind of president that Trump would be if he gets elected. I've lost track of the questions. I guess this is the fifth question. It's about religion, in the role of religion in the election. Religion is playing an unusual role in this presidential election. Most evangelical leaders supported Ted Cruz for president during the Republican primaries. They weren't terribly enthusiastic about Donald Trump. There were a few that supported him, but really not the most evangelical ministers and leaders supported Ted Cruz. However, in the actual elections, the evangelicals voted for Donald Trump. Which shows, frankly, that these evangelical leaders are like generals without troops. Their people didn't follow them. Now that he got the nomination from the Republican Party, more evangelical leaders came around to support him, but primarily because they don't like Hillary Clinton. They especially don't like her positions on gay marriage and abortion. So now the Catholic bishops, on the other hand, have stayed fairly quiet during this election. They don't like Donald Trump, but at the same time they don't like the pro-choice and pro-gay marriage positions of Hillary Clinton. But in the United States, the American bishops don't endorse candidates They talk about the issues, and you can kind of tell who they're leaning towards by which issues they talk about. But most bishops try and avoid getting involved in the election. They're silent, which means that the few bishops who do speak out tend to get a lot of publicity, and people think that they are speaking for all of the bishops. Recently, there's been a poll that shows that only 38% of white Catholic women are supporting Trump, and that almost half of them are supporting Hillary. Trump is going to have a very difficult time winning the election without the Catholic vote. And of course, the Hispanic Catholic vote is very strongly against Trump. But 4 years ago, the white Catholics supported Mitt Romney, a Mormon. This year, the white Catholic vote seems to be split right down the middle, with half supporting Hillary and half supporting Donald. It's interesting, though, that white Catholic women are rejecting Trump. 60% of white Catholic men, on the other hand, are still supporting Trump. The sixth question is about Tim Kaine. Hillary Clinton picked Tim Kaine because she clearly wanted a young Catholic candidate who could attract younger voters, working class voters, and Catholic voters, all of those things that Tim Kaine embodies. He worked as a Jesuit volunteer in Honduras, teaching people how to weld and do carpentry work. His father was a welder, so he knew that he had learned that himself from his father. As governor of Virginia, Tim Kaine said that even though he personally opposed abortion and personally opposed capital punishment, he would enforce the law of the land. As a result, something like 20 people were executed in Virginia while he was governor. People around him said that this was a very painful experience for him, but he felt that even though he opposed capital punishment, he felt that he had to follow the laws of Virginia, which the people had put in place. He says the same thing about abortion. This, of course, has been quite controversial among the American bishops, who are very upset when a Catholic candidate is pro-choice. When you look at where the American Catholic public are, there's hardly any difference between the American Catholic public's views on abortion and the rest of America's views on abortion. Basically, American Catholics don't like abortion. They think it's wrong. But they don't want to make it illegal. And that appears to be where the public opinion polls have shown the American public and American Catholics to be for about the last 30 years, without much change in the views of Catholics or the American public at large. The seventh question is about the WikiLeaks emails. There was a lot of discussion and controversy about emails that were leaked by WikiLeaks, who appear to have gotten them from the Russian government. about Hillary Clinton's campaign. There was a discussion in these emails by John Podesta and some other members of the campaign about Catholic voters and Catholic positions on birth control and other things like that, which were labeled as anti-Catholic by Donald Trump and his campaign and by some other Republicans. What they failed to note, however, was that all of the people involved in this discussion were themselves Catholics. It was kind of a typical argument being put forth by progressive Catholics about the changes that they would like to see in the church. To call these things anti-Catholic is simply a mistake. They're clearly Catholics who simply disagree with some of the positions of the church, and we're having a discussion internally, privately, among themselves about this. To call that anti-Catholic, I think, is a stretch. Question 9, I'm a little confused by it, but it's asking about the role of U.S. corporations, I guess, in investing abroad. One of the key issues that's been discussed during the election has been trade. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders both argued that the trade deals that the United States had with Latin America, namely NAFTA, and that the United States has negotiated with Southeast Asia and Asian countries, have been detrimental to the U.S. economy, especially by exporting jobs to these countries abroad. Hillary Clinton has even jumped on board, although she was a supporter of free trade in the past because of the campaign and the views of the American public. She switched her position. Trade is a complicated issue. Clearly, globalization is a reality. It's here. There's no way to stop it, really. And not only that, but the ability of corporations to invest anywhere in the world where they want is pretty much uncontrollable. So the question comes up, how do you deal with this and what do you do? I think that Catholic social teaching is conflicted on this. On the one hand, we as American Catholics have to be concerned about workers in the United States. On the other hand, we also have to be concerned about poor people all over the world. And international trade is one way that developing countries can grow their economies and provide jobs for their people. And then I think these countries then also have to start putting into place protections for unions, protections against unfair labor practices, protection, against pollution and destruction of the environment, all of these kinds of things. So I think it's not just the responsibility of the United States to deal with these things, it's also the responsibility of every country where these investments are taking place. The people in these countries have to demand that their governments put in place programs to protect workers and to protect the environment. Question 10 has to do with the United Nations. The Vatican has been a strong supporter of the United Nations since its founding after the Second World War. In fact, it was a strong supporter of the League of Nations, which preceded the United Nations. At the same time, everything that the United Nations does is not good. Pope Francis has been very concerned about what he calls ideological colonization or ideological colonialism, where Western countries, where the United Nations, where international foundations and lobbies try and impose their views on the developing world, the global South, in areas that are contrary to their cultures. I think that this is a problem in some areas where they're trying to, for example, when funding agencies come in and say, if you want financing for healthcare, then you have to legalize abortion. I mean, that's blackmail, ultimately. On the other hand, we tend to applaud these agencies when they come into a country and say, you have to stop corruption. You have to respect human rights. You have to stop arresting political opponents. You have to respect labor unions. So I think this cuts both ways. Do we want the United States and international agencies in the UN to just turn the blind eye to everything that happens in a country, or should it use its power? Clearly, China and Russia take a different approach to this. China doesn't care whether a country is democratic, authoritarian, dictatorial. They just want to do business with it. They're just simply working, seeking their own political, economic advantage. I think people have to decide what they really want the United States to do with its power. And sometimes the United States and the UN will use its power in ways we like, and sometimes they will use their power in ways we don't like. Question 11, and the last question, is about the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom that I'm the chair of. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom is an independent, bipartisan government commission of 9 members, 3 appointed by the President, 3 appointed by leaders of the House of Representatives, and 3 appointed by the leaders in the United States Senate. Our mandate is to observe and report on the state of international religious freedom outside the United States, and to report on it and to make recommendations to the President, the Secretary of State, and the Congress. The United States believes in religious freedom. It's part of our U.S. Constitution. It's one of the things that made the United States unique when it was founded in 1776. The fact that we were going to be a country of many religions, there would not be a state religion, and that everyone would be able to practice and preach their religion with complete freedom. We see this as a fundamental human right. In fact, it's a right recognized under international law. And our commission tries to promote religious freedom around the world. There are thousands of people in jail because of their religious beliefs. There are people getting killed both by governments and by mobs and in wars around the world because of differences over religious views. We consider this an absolute tragedy. Respect for one another's religious views, allowing religious freedom, we believe is a step towards peace. If we could do that, for example, in the Middle East, I think we would be moving the world closer to peace. So that's one of the things we try to do as members of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Every year we issue an annual report where we talk about the worst countries in terms of religious freedom and what they're doing. That report can be found on our website, which is at uscirf.gov. That's uscirf.gov.